To the uncultured football fan amongst us, the name Union Berlin is not one which includes a cold chill down the spine. But it should. The men from the German capital are currently tearing up the rulebook and terrifying the old guard of German football in the process. There is a new red and white force in Germany, and they go by the name Union Berlin. Stay tuned to hear all about their meteoric rise. Let's take a quick look at the history of Union. Unlike some of the more renowned clubs in Germany, such as Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund, 1FC Union Berlin are a relatively new club. The club are still less than 60 years old after only being founded back in 1966 as FC Olympia Oberschonewede. But just 2 years later, they would change their name to what we know today as 1FC Union Berlin, in a bid to distance themselves from the East German government and socialist regime of the time. Despite some immediate successes, the fall of the Berlin Wall signalled testing times for Union, and they almost went out of existence in the early 2000s, as financial instability saw them very nearly forced into bankruptcy. Around this time, they were plying their trade in the fourth tier. But a restructuring of German football in 2001 to 2002 saw them promoted to the second division. A yo-yo period ensued, which saw Union at one point relegated to the fifth tier. But they regrouped and came again, and in 2009 were promoted to the Bundesliga 2, where they would become a fixture for the next decade. Up until the start of the 2009-10 season, Union was simply a lower league team who didn't register on the radar of any of Germany's more prestigious teams. But the stability which consecutive seasons in the second division brought meant that they were primed for an assault on the Bundesliga, a dream which was realised in 2019 to 2020. As they were promoted to German football's top division for the first time in the club's history. David would be joining Goliath at the top table. So, where did they gather their loyal support from? East Germany in the period between the end of World War II and the fall of the Berlin Wall wasn't a particularly great place to live. And East German football was simply an extension of the brutal conditions the country's people were living under. The Stasi, the East German secret police, were even managing to oppress football clubs around the country as they bullied other teams into giving them their best players. This was a tactic which saw their team, Dynamo Berlin, win 10 consecutive Oberliga titles from the late 70s right up until the wall came down. Of course, this bred resentment with fans of the game, and Union would grow as a team and fan base with an anti-establishment ethos. A team who drew support from a plethora of different communities around Berlin, all who had the same goal: to rid the country of communism. Although never very successful, their loyal fans had a rather charming song which went something along the lines of, "I'd rather be a loser than a Stasi pig." They were also adamant that the wall needed to come down, which it would shortly after. This brought with it a period of relative success as results improved in the 90s, which saw them regularly challenging at the top end of the divisions which they found themselves in. But trouble was brewing in southeast Berlin. We're talking financial woes next. Stay with us. As we briefly mentioned earlier, Union Berlin almost ceased to exist in 2004, as they were relegated despite finishing the top half. This was down to financial mismanagement, but it wasn't the first time their fans had been through something like this. Back in the early 1990s, Union twice finished at the summit of the NOFV-Oberliga Mitte, the old third tier of German football. But they were not permitted entry into the second division because they simply couldn't afford it. Of course, they would eventually make it to the Bundesliga 2 in 2001. But again, they wouldn't be around for long, as those financial problems reared their ugly heads once again in 2004, and they were again relegated. Around this time, lifelong Union fan Dirk Zingler became the club's president, a position he still holds to this day. But the situation he inherited was not a pretty one. Zingler's team were in dire need of a cash injection, and they found one from a quite astonishing source. Coined Bleed for Union, fans grouped together and donated blood for their club. Now, this might sound strange for fans from other countries, but in Germany, people are compensated for donating blood. Union's fans then simply passed the money they had earned by giving blood onto the club. Talk about bleeding for your team. We're talking community next. Stay tuned. There's no denying the fact that Union are a team for the people. Fan-owned and operated, the club has been saved more than once by their loyal following, and not just money-wise. Back in 2008, as they just clung onto their league status, their stadium, the Stadion an der Alten Forsterei, was literally crumbling. Not to worry though, as fans donated more than 140,000 hours collectively to give their club's home a much-needed makeover. And their efforts were immediately repaid by the players, who were promoted to Bundesliga 2 the following season. A period of stability followed, before a real promotion push in 2017. This ultimately failed, but that season can probably be identified as the beginning of a new era for Union Berlin. As the club's hierarchy began to believe for the first time that they actually could achieve promotion, they decided to make arguably the most important signing in the club's history. In 2018, Urs Fischer, who had previously spent his whole career both playing and managing in the Swiss Superliga, was installed as manager. And it's safe to say that all those involved in Union Berlin haven't looked back since. Let's take a closer look at Fischer then. Somewhat strangely, Fischer had won back-to-back titles with Basel before arriving in the German capital. But their new owners failed to offer him a new deal. Their loss was Union's gain. Having previously done well with FC Thun, Fischer was highly regarded around Central Europe, and Union were not going to let him slip by. Some have compared his early successes with Thun to what he would go on to do with Union, and it's easy to see why. One of the first things he did was to turn Union into a side who other teams would not relish playing against. Fans of English football who might not be too familiar with Fischer or his style might picture a Sam Allardyce or Tony Puller's team. And just like those two, Fischer expected anyone who played for him to give 110% effort-wise. He also gave a structure to a defence that was a little too leaky for his liking and made the team hard to beat. A must for any manager dreaming of success. In his first season at the helm, Union's defence was one of the most formidable in the league. But they were drawing too many games. A poor run of form towards the end of the season meant they would miss out on an automatic promotion. However, they still had one last chance in the shape of the promotion-relegation playoff. They were up against Stuttgart, a team who had been crowned champions of Germany on no fewer than 5 occasions. But this didn't matter to the plucky upstarts from the capital. An away goal saw them through, and the unfancied team of the people, for the people, were dining with football royalty. How have they managed to secure their top-flight status? Union Berlin led the Bundesliga for the first time in their existence earlier this season. But this didn't come as a surprise to many around the game after their steady ascent over the past 3 years. In their first season in the top division, Union finished in 11th position, safely avoiding relegation. This was largely down to the goals of Swedish hitman Sebastian Andersson, who was promptly sold at the end of the season. Fans would have been forgiven for panicking, but some shrewd loan and free transfer signings that summer meant that the club would go one better the following season, finishing in the Europa League places. One of those shrewd signings, Max Kruse, writing himself into the club's history books with the winner on the final day of the season against Leipzig to make sure they would be playing in Europe for the first time in their history. And this way of doing business has been the blueprint of success for Union. They don't crave the headlines, and they don't spend beyond their means. Too many clubs have gotten to the promised land only to overspend, then face financial ruin when they inevitably go down. Not Union Berlin though. No, this is a team led by supporters, a group of savvy individuals who will not risk the well-being of the club to bring in a superstar. Their record signings remain right-back Josip Juranovic, who recently played in a World Cup semi-final, which should tell you something about his quality, and Taiwo Awoniyi. Both these players cost €8.55 million each, proving that you don't need to spend big. You simply need to spend smart. So, what does the future hold for Union? Well, right now, it's anyone's guess. They've had another solid start to the season and look like they might be on course for a Champions League finish. Whether they have enough juice in the legs is another question. Of course, they don't have the deepest squad around, but Urs Fischer and his gang of merry men have already defied plenty of naysayers. Who is to say that they cannot go one better this term and book their trips to the grounds like Nou Camp and San Siro next season? Whatever happens, the story of Union Berlin is an incredible one, and Urs Fischer, Dirk Zingler, and the fans who have made it all possible should be given a ton of credit for what they've achieved with the club who, 10 years ago, not many outside of Germany had ever even heard of. As usual, thanks for stopping by today, and remember to tune in again next time for some more great content. And why not do us a big favour by liking today's video, as well as sharing and subscribing. Bye guys!